Dude, my hands are huge.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
On today's episode, we're taking a look at Come Together from chillfox Games, and this was a bit of a surprise hit at Essen, it seemed. It was only a small booth, but a lot of people were sort of talking about it. Not a lot of reviewers, just general people, word of mouth really, where they said, oh, come on, check out this game. It's pretty sweet. It's got this colourful aesthetics, and Board Game Ramblings were going on about it, particularly Sunova, she recommended it to me. And the designer said, like, oh, you've got to come and try this game out, Luke. I reckon you'll probably like it. So I thought, cool, I'll come by the booth and, check it out. One, I could never get into a free game, and two, every time I came around the booth, the designer was, strangely absent. It's like he had a row of spies everywhere, and every time I was going anywhere near Hall 3, he basically got out of Dodge or something. Oh well, that's no different how most women sort of act around me.
Oh, my heart bleeds!
But what got me interested in this was the idea that it was set around a 60s hippie music festival. Now, I don't like necessarily 60s music or hippie festivals, but it's something different. It's something new, something unique, and I gotta give props when anybody does that. But new doesn't necessarily mean good, so we'll have to dive into some detail to find out. In Come Together, you organise your own festival, using your volunteers to attract an audience and the hottest artists, build stages and camps, and gain publicity to make your festival the best of all time. Come Together is a worker placement game, but with a special twist. When you place workers, you do not immediately gain the card you just claimed. You must wait until a player activates that location, which also activates it for everyone else on that location. Players are then constantly facing important dilemmas, whether to claim a card or activate a location, and whether to claim the card you really want or claim a less attractive card in order to gain more publicity by joining other players on another location. As you level up the different publicity tracks on your player board, you'll gain further bonuses as well as endgame scoring opportunities. Everyone wants to see the Cascadians, Tikki Tooraid and Great Western Cowboys this summer, but which festival will they play? After 3 rounds of organising your music festival, you total up your points and of course, the one with the most.
Of course!
Now I like to compare the game I'm reviewing to other games that are out there, but Come Together makes this rather tricky because I can't really legit think of one. This is a worker placement game and there's a ton of them out there. Okay, that's fine. But the idea that you go to the location and you're hoping that somebody else in the group triggers the location and then by doing so, everybody who's there gets benefits. There's not a lot of games I can think of that do that. There's little subsets where, for example, like in Lords of Waterdeep, you build a building and then somebody goes to the building, they get the benefit, but you get a little reward. Fine, but there's only so much connection between that and this. Weather Machine, has an R&D section and the Weather Machine sections where everybody can kind of chip in, but then once it activates, everybody who's there gets involved. But that's a subset of that game, like a small subset, and even then, that's a Lacerda game. That's like way above the complexity levels of Come Together. So for a game in this midweight category that has this much potential for player interaction with the worker placement side, yeah, I can't legit think of a decent game to compare it to. By all means, get some in the comments if you want to help out and lend your thoughts. But you know what? I'm actually more glad that's the case, because if I can compare it to other games, I will. But it does impress me when I can't, because it means that this game has a chance to stand out amongst the crowd. And standing out amongst the crowd in worker placement, which is one of the most bloated genres out there, is pretty impressive, to say the least. Aesthetics are for the most part good, although with some blemishes. Certainly from a thematic perspective, the aesthetics have come together really help to go with the theme and setting. It's not that this game is the most thematic thing ever, it's not, it's abstracted to a T, but the colour of all these meeples, the fact that they're screen printed for different types of singers, all your flower power tokens being wooden, different locations, strong cardboard, all the different cards with really colourful artwork, a lot of thought has been put into making this visually pleasing, and for the most part it does a very, very good job. The only thing I'm a little bit hazy on though is that it's got this kind of warm wear and tear style look. Sometimes the cards look like they've got, like, it almost looks like bits are rubbing off them, but it's just part of the artwork. And I had the same thing with the board, where I can look around the edge and I see these white frayed edges. And at first I thought I'd received a duff copy of the game, but I think that's just part of the artwork. You know, it's meant to look like that. And I don't know if I really wanted it to look like a sort of half-worn feel, but it's no big deal as long as you get used to the fact that that's the thing. But otherwise, lots of colour, lots of 60s hippie styleness, and certainly a lot of meeples for your money. It's a pretty good package for the money you're paying. And with this setting comes a nice little gimmick, which I find kind of charming. Sometimes this bothers me in games, but here I think it works, where basically a lot of the acts are all named after board games, but they've been given that 60s vibe. I particularly like Wikiculture for viticulture, I think that's pretty cool, and Isle of Skye, which sounds kind of Irish, but that's for Isle of Skye. But already in my hand here I've got Teener Towns, Tiny Towns, I've got the Flower Grids, Power Grid, and I got Too Many Stones, Too Many Bones, you know. It's a charming gimmick and you'll sort of chuckle when you see them, but, you know, these are names that I would actually see a 60s hippie band have, so it works in a charming way for this setting. You know, you may think it's a gimmick, but you know what, as gimmicks go, it fits. The rulebook is also not half bad. A lot of stuff is laid out in the order I would expect. There's a lot of pictorial representation for how certain things work. Yes, there is a fair bit of text and it is kind of small. I do think they could have made the font a little bit bigger, but I didn't really have any problems understanding how the different actions on your turn worked. The slight downside that might hinder somebody's learning curve for this is that there is a lot of iconography. I mean, the bonus overview and the cards overview is a double page spread in itself, and then you've got this giant appendix on the back with every icon that can appear in the game, and there's quite a lot of it, so you are going to have to get used to that. However, and thank you, I mean, for a relatively small publisher to come by and show you how it's done, reference cards. Yes, everybody gets a little reference card, which is one of the best reference cards I've seen for a game in a while, actually. There's no text on it, but the icons feel clear as day as to what they are. Once you've gone through the rules once, I can pretty much show this reference card in front of somebody and they'll get how the different free actions work, what the step-by-step process is of action C, which is retrieve your workers, and then on the back it gives you a more step-by-step version of how action B works, which is activating the locations. This reference card is all you need, really, with maybe a tiny bit of help from the icon index to get each turn going at a relatively smooth pace. So I gotta give props. This was a lot easier to get into and a lot easier to teach than I thought. That being said, there is a fair bit of rules overhead in general. They're just not overly complex. People will understand what they're doing in this game and they'll be able to go along at a pretty good pace, but it's not the shortest teach. You've got to explain all the different cards, of which there's a lot. You've got to explain a lot of the icons. You've got to explain the free publicity tracks on your board, end of round scoring objectives. There's quite a bit to get going, but honestly, it could have been a lot worse. So I gotta give props that it was as fluid as it turned out to be.
Okay, that's a start. That's very Earth-friendly.
Come Together tries to mitigate the downtime that you would normally have in these sort of games by having the players activate the locations as a group. And this allows for a lot more fluid turns and the fact that not everybody's doing the same thing each round, but also just the idea that you have a little bit of tension in when these locations are going to activate. So these are some like round 3 locations, for example, but you'll have 4 of them laid out, and you might think, well, I want to go to this spot and I'll grab that action, I'll grab this bonus right now, and I would quite like the card above it. But then the publicity tracks go up more if more people are on it, regardless of player, when it activates. So you're kind of thinking, well, maybe I'll go join that card over there. I mean, it's not a card I desperately want, but then when it gets activated, I'm going to get a massive rush of publicity on TV. That'd be pretty sweet. But then you'll be just like thinking, well, I need to go grab that card. I'll go to that location. And you're hoping that eventually people are going to join the location and you can activate it later. But you could also just basically, in bird culture, do a dick move and say, you know what, I'm going to go to this location, the other players do something else, and I'm just going to activate the location by myself. Bye-bye cards, I'm going to have this one and get the bonus for myself. Yeah, you don't get as much publicity, but it's still something you can do.
In bird culture, this is considered a dick move.
And it's cool that it does allow for the downtime to be mitigated up to a point. More on that later. But, you know, it's not just action, then action, and action, and action, action. It could be, right, I've done my actions, your turn. Okay, waiting. Oh, you're activating that location. Okay, well, I'm on there. Ooh, what do I fancy doing? I'll probably level up this track here, maybe this one. And it gets people involved. Always a good thing. The publicity tracks themselves allow for that style of play where you're chaining combos together. As you go up each track, they trigger effects, like you might get a bonus Meeple every now and again, you might level up on other tracks, you might be able to store more cards underneath your board for camps, and it's satisfying to get the publicity bonuses, level up, and then go, right, I'm going to level up there, which gets me a Meeple, and then I'll level up again, that gets me to level up on this track, which then allows me to get another card, right, I'll grab this card, you know, then I can unlock something out of my planning area, more on that in a minute, and it allows for turns like that. I also really like the refreshing change from a typical worker placement game, where it's not just you have 2 workers at the start of the game and then you have to buy more as the game goes on. It's not even technically like Architects, where you start off with all your workers and then you just have all those workers for the game. This does something a little bit different. Essentially, you have a pool of these workers, which are cool screen printed wooden discs at the start of the game, but there's more available. And the idea is that you place a certain amount on each location in order to activate them, but when you retrieve your workers back, you're then given the choice to either get a new worker, doesn't cost a thing, which is great, it's nice that I don't have to spend a ton of resources to get a worker anymore. But then what you can do is you could also say, you know what, I'm going to sacrifice a worker, because then it allows me to, you know, do this cool effect, or like trigger a card immediately, and it's like, ooh, that's tempting. I'm almost tempted to do that. But then you're constantly juggling with the other players. Like, I haven't got that many workers. I really could do with retrieving one. All right, fine. I'll grab another one. You might have 5. You might have 4. Somebody's got 6. He's only got 3. And, you know, it means that the idea of when workers get taken back or when locations tend to activate feels very dynamic, much like games like the Manhattan Project series, where the workers keep coming to and froing at various different times. Similar here, but it's just a nice refreshing change of pace. As I said, I don't have to like spend ages farming a ton of money or some other resource that then allows me to buy a worker, which I'm forced to do because I cannot win the game unless I unlock more workers. You do not have to get all your workers available to win the game. It's handy, but it really doesn't come down to that, and sometimes you do want to sacrifice a worker because the benefit of doing so is pretty sweet. Again, just nice little twists. The player scaling is where I think this game falters a little bit. Chillfox has a thing of making their games available for up to 6 players, which they say, yeah, this is cool, we can have a lot of people playing and there's not as much downtime. Now, granted, there is a mitigation to the downtime in this game, but that's not to say that 5 or 6 players is the way I want to play this game. Firstly, it does still extend the length of the game. Yes, you might be involved in other people's turns because of activating locations, but 5 or 6 players is still going to take a fair while to get through the 3 rounds, and even at 4 players this game can certainly reach past 90 minutes to 2 hours if you're playing your first game. So adding more time on top of that, I think this game just starts to outstay its welcome at that point. The other problem is the board scaling I don't think fits with 5 or 6 players, because this is the board where it's 1 or 2 to 4 players, and the only difference between this and the 5 to 6 player version is the bonuses for activating locations that you get are marginally different, but mainly it's just the fact that you get 1 extra activation around with 5 players and then 2 extra activations with 6 players. Adding a whole new player doesn't feel like it only warrants 1 extra activation. I feel like you need a few more with 5 or 6 players because of the biggest issue I have, the chaos factor. When you've got 3 or 4 of you, which I think is the sweet spot for this game, it's possible to have the locations activate, fairly frequently, but kind of half when you want them to and half not. But in a 5 to 6 player game though, the chaos factor and the randomness just shoots out of proportion, because these locations are triggering all over the place. Yeah, it gives you one extra activation, but it could still be a little bit weird as to when they do. And even then, 6-player game, you might have a location with somebody on it, 3 other people come to it, and then the 4th person activates it, and you don't get a chance to even jump on the location at all because of the turn order. And I don't know, that just felt a little bit weird for me at times when I did actually try this at 6. The game just went on, I think, too long. It was quite messy trying to coordinate everybody, because yes, you do have this giant pawn to say, right, I'm the one who triggered the location, but still coordinating 6 people and juggling all the cards and doing all the different things with activating a location, it feels a little bit like, this is best capped at 4. I mean, these locations do not scale at all. You get 4 things in each one, and that's it. Does not matter on the player count. 3, 4, 5, or 6. You try squeezing 6 players on these locations, it gets a little bit of a pain, particularly if one area that you desperately need gets cornered off and then doesn't activate for a while. On the lower end of the scale, for 1 and 2 players, you've got to control this friend bot. Now, for a 2-player game, you effectively have this dummy bot that triggers with certain actions, and there's hearts on the actions, which you have to ignore, and anything from 3-player onwards, that trigger basically this little deck of cards where a neutral player puts tokens out and potentially activates locations. Having to learn an extra page of rules though to do the 2-player game is a little annoying, and even then I feel like I'd rather have 3 players with 3 actual human opponents. So 2-player is not my first recommendation for this. The solo game surprisingly works better than the 2-player game though, because in the solo mode, which again is only about half a page of rules, so it's actually easier to learn, it's a very straightforward one, because literally all that happens is you flip the card at the start of the turn and it dictates where the tokens go, flip a second one for which particular card they go after, and that's kind of it. You lose some VP if they trigger locations before you and stuff, but mainly it's just a beat your own score. And you know what? As beat your own score games go, this one is still quite fun, because most of what's enjoyable is just having fun with these different cards and triggering combos and, trying to time yourself with the AI bot as to when you should go into locations. Would I prefer if there was a proper autom there, or maybe some other objective you were going for? Maybe, yeah, but you know what? As a solo game, it's relatively quick because you set the board up with the locations in front of you, and then you just go for it. You're just nice and quick. You can be done in about 60 minutes. It's not a bad length. The card balance is a little bit iffy in this as well. You've got 4 different locations to trigger cards, and you've got the 4 different types. Now, you're going to need camp cards. You're going to need a few of these, but only up to a point, because, yeah, you can move your counter on it and get bonuses, and they store the meeples, but there's very big diminishing returns when you get to a certain amount of cards for how many meeples you physically need. You can only have up to 5 acts perform at the same time at the end of a round, and you're unlikely to have that kind of setup. It's just not impossible to get that many cards. So once you get to a certain amount of camp cards, you don't feel like you need more. The Meeple cards, again, you're only going to need to use these every now and again, because I found that there's quite a lot of ways to get Meeples in this game, but they're still semi-useful. You are going to constantly need these Act cards and the Up-and-Comer cards. Thankfully, the Up-and-Comer cards are spread throughout all 4 locations, but yeah, you're going to constantly need to get these because, well, they're your main source of points. If you don't get them, you're going to lose. So these are very popular, but then the stages just seem like a bit of a waste after a while. You can only have up to 5 of them. You get a starting one to begin with, and the only difference with these is that, essentially, if you put a certain colour Meeple on the stages for the act, like say the act wants 2 green meeples, you might be able to get an extra point, maybe 2 per green meeple. I mean, they're nice, and more points is more points, but that's literally really all the stages do, other than this weird little mini game which doesn't make any thematic sense, where you're trying to line up the sides of the cards to make little, cups and pizzas and stuff like that, and at the end of the game you score points for making the sets. This, I think, is the weak link for the cards, because after a while I just don't bother collecting them, and the whole mini game of trying to connect up the pizzas and the drinks is very abstract and just kind of odd. It feels like that's just stenciled on in order to make the card more useful, because if you didn't have that, the stage cards would barely be useful at all once you'd got about 2 or 3 of them.
Ooh, I think there was something funny in that, hippie.
On a similar vein, the publicity tracks themselves. They're all useful publicity tracks, but there's quite quite a big emphasis on the newspaper one. You have these objective tiles, one for each round of the game, and you know what they are in advance. But they essentially require you to get up the newspaper track so that you either score a lot of points or potentially lose points in a penalty for meeting a certain criteria. So in this case, it wants you to get like extra upgrades. Okay, cool. Well, if you're not high up on the newspaper track, you'll actually lose points for every one that you have, which is like pretty insane, up to a max of 6. But then if you get further up the track, like if you can max it out, you can score up to 12 points from each of these. And I feel like the point differential between somebody who does well on this and someone who doesn't is quite large. Like, I've never seen anybody do well enough at this game to win by ignoring these newspaper tiles. You really do have to try and get up to level 2 or 3 on this on a fairly regular basis. So it does kind of pigeonhole you into this route. You know, if this one wants me to get a bunch of a particular type of meeple, yeah, ignore it at my own peril, because I really want those points and the extra bonus that comes with being at the top level. So you really do find that a lot of people are really scrounging for the newspaper article. Maybe that's the mentality of players I've been with, but suffice to say, anybody who's ignored it completely has lost every time. So Come Together makes for a very refreshing twist on the typical worker placement genre, and if you're gonna make a name for yourself in this genre, you have to do something different now. You cannot just be like every generic worker placement. That time is done. You've got to twist it a little bit, and this one, with the group activated locations and the retrieving of the workers and spending them or gaining more for free based on whether you want to get the bonus or just have more workers, is enough of a twist that I can say that this game stands out on its own and is quite unlike a lot of games. That being said, as much as I like the visual aesthetics of the game for the most part, and it's, you know, well produced for the price, and it certainly has a lot of good stuff about it, there is some negatives as well though, with regards to some of the player scaling from like 1 to 6 players, where I don't think I'd want to play this with 2 or 5 or 6. I'm pretty much playing this with 3 or 4 and occasionally solo. The balance of some of the cards that you can get and the tracks, you know, is questionable, but I'm not going to hype on it too much for that. And even though the rules are fairly simple, there is still quite a lot of iconography to learn that is going to make the teach a little bit lengthy to begin with, but again, not too complex. So I do quite enjoy this game. I think overall I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. It's good, and I'll certainly endorse it. It's different enough that I want to hang on to this for a little while and see if maybe over time it becomes a bit of a sleeper hit for me. But at the moment it's like in the 5,000s on Board Game Geek. This one doesn't have a lot of backing behind it. You know, it was relatively not well known. It was in the biggest booth at, you know, biggest hall at Essen, and it certainly had enough people playing the game, but not a lot of buzz has been said about it. And you know what? I'm here to tell you that this is a genuinely good, cool little game with a fun little gimmick that's gonna, you know, get you talking about some of the cards. I particularly like the thought they've put into making it look cool, producing it well, and the creativity in mind for a bunch of these acts that they've used for the cards. You know, it's gonna wear off that gimmick after a while, but again, it just makes for something that looks different, unique, and visually pleasing. So overall, a good game, 7 out of 10, recommended to give it a try if you get a chance.
Ooh, that hippie's starting to kick in.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, please remember, please thumb it up on YouTube and on Board Game Geek, and let's get it in the hot review section. If you want to help support the channel, there's also a Patreon campaign that runs, but most of all, get your comments down below and let me know your thoughts on the game, agree or disagree. Do you like the theme, the aesthetics, the mechanics I talk about, and do you think the player scaling actually works better for you in some respects? Like I say, I like to know your thoughts, and I like to read and respond when I can. If you want to check out more content on the channel, then I've done 2 videos on behalf of Asmodee where I talk about 7 Wonders expansions, both Edifice, the new one, and all the ones that came before it, Leaders, Cities, and Armada. If you're of any kind of 7 Wonders fan, you're gonna want to check out those 2 videos. So take care, and remember as always, regardless of what type of music you're into, it's still only a game. Bye for now.